Before we get into today's show, let me tell you about the latest deal from Mike Lindell, MyPillow. Once again, the big box stores have canceled their orders simply because they don't agree with Mike Lindell's politics. They don't like it because he supports President Trump. Well, he's going to pass that savings on to you. No more middleman. And boy, does he have some great deals on the Giza Dream sheets and the Percal bed sheets. Listen to this. Giza Dream queen size, normally $139.98. Your wholesale price, $69.99 when you use promo code Joey. King size, only $79.99. The Percal queen size, normally $89.98. Your wholesale price, $29.98 when you use promo code Joey. Just call 1-800-893-4059 or go to mypillow.com. Always use promo code Joey. Free shipping options available. This allotment's not going to last very long. When they're gone, they're gone. mypillow.com. Promo code Joey. Thanks for joining me in the PhD Weight Loss and Nutrition Studios. To lose weight for the last time, visit myphdweightloss.com. Governor Gavin Newsom is pointing his finger at President Donald Trump on the price of a gallon of gasoline in his state. In some cases, Californians are paying $2 per gallon more than the rest of the country. So the question is it the war or is it the failed environmental policies pushed by the governor and his tree-hugging cronies? We'll jump right into that today. Bernie Moreno pressed a former Biden senior advisor over a simple question. Is illegal entry into our country a crime? The Senate hearing exploded. We'll get you the details on that as well. Minnesota Department of Human Services officials skipped a key hearing this week that was held by a State House fraud prevention panel. Apparently, the Democrats aren't as anxious to uncover the fraud as Governor Walz has claimed. We have the latest details on that from Minnesota as well. And prosecutors say a Greenville company knowingly processed hundreds of thousands of faulty COVID-19 tests and raked in millions in fraudulent reimbursements from the federal government. It's a busy day. We're going to jump right in.
I told you we'd be back.
And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free.
It's Joey Hudson.
I wanted to name it the Joey Hudson bill, but, they don't allow you to put names on bills. But I wanted to call it the Joey Hudson bill because I know that one's been near and dear to you for a number of years.
That's how it's done. Let your voice be heard.
And the truth shall set you free.
Here's Joey Hudson.
One of the things that always fascinates me about politics in America is how quickly blame gets passed around when something goes wrong. Gas prices go up, groceries go up, the cost of living climbs, and almost immediately someone in power finds somebody else to blame. Have you noticed that? And that's exactly what's happening right now out in California. Governor Gavin Newsom, who many people believe is quietly positioning himself for a run at the White House in 2028, is blaming rising gas prices on President Donald Trump's military action against Iran. Now, Newsom took to social media this week, claimed Americans will pay about $1.5 billion more at the gas pump this week because of what he calls Trump's war with Iran.
What's the end game here? We've seen gas prices spike because of his decision, cause and effect by 69 cents here in the state of California, 60 cents plus overall on average across the United States of America. We've seen markets roiling. We've seen no real end game in sight as it relates to the Strait of Hormuz. We saw today oil prices now going back in that $90 barrel range and more concern about the extended range of the Iranian attacks, not just in the Middle East, but to your point and question about the prospects that we could see things happen here in the homeland.
Now, that's a pretty dramatic claim. Here's the problem with it. If the conflict in Iran is the main reason gas prices are rising, then why aren't prices skyrocketing everywhere else in the country like they are in California? Yes, prices are up, given, but not like they're seeing in California. Because when you look at the numbers, something just doesn't add up. Across the United States right now, the average price of gasoline is about $3.57 per gallon. That's up. That's the national average. But in California, the average price is sitting around $5.33 per gallon. And in some parts of the state, drivers are already paying $5.50, $5.70, and even approaching $6 a gallon. So the question people are asking is pretty simple. If the war in Iran is causing the problem, Why is the rest of the country paying $3 for gas while California drivers are paying nearly double? That's where the political fight begins. Steve Hilton, who is currently running as a Republican candidate for governor of California, says Newsom is trying to shift the blame, like Newsom often does. Hilton says the real issue isn't foreign policy. The real issue is, according to critics, is California's own energy policy. California has the highest gas taxes in the entire country. Drivers in California pay roughly 70 cents per gallon in state gas taxes alone. That doesn't include additional environmental fees, regulatory costs, or special fuel requirements that are unique to California. All of those layers of regulation drive the price higher before a single gallon even reaches the pump. Hilton says the result is simple. California drivers are paying the price for what he calls 15 years of one-party rule and aggressive climate policies. And he's not the only one saying that. Critics across the state, including some energy industry leaders, say that California's environmental policies have dramatically reduced local energy production. Over the years, refineries have closed, drilling has been restricted, and new regulations are constantly being added to limit fossil fuel use. They have really adopted the whole idea of electric vehicles, even electric 18-wheelers, which we all know is not going to work. Now, supporters of those policies would say that's intentional. California has been trying to transition towards renewable energy and reduce carbon emissions. But critics argue the transition is happening before the alternatives are ready, leaving drivers stuck paying the difference. And the concern isn't just about prices at the pump. Some experts are warning these policies could shrink California's remaining oil refining industry even further, thus increasing prices even more. Chevron's president recently sent a letter to state officials warning that new proposed regulations, part of a program called Cap and Invest, could force refineries to shut down. According to that warning, the policy could result in hundreds of thousands of lost jobs, higher fuel costs, and serious pressure on the state's energy supply. Industry leaders say the policy would remove large numbers of emissions allowances from the market, dramatically tightening what companies are allowed to produce. The goal, of course, is reducing pollution. But critics say the real-world effect could be less fuel supply and much, much higher prices. And that leads to the larger political argument that's now taking place in California. Is California paying more for gas because of global events or because of state policy decisions? That debate is heating up quickly, especially with the 2028 presidential conversation already quietly beginning, because Governor Newsom has built much of his national reputation around aggressive climate action. He often says California is leading the world in fighting climate change. Supporters see that as bold leadership. Critics say it's a warning sign for what national energy policy might look like under similar leadership in the White House. Meanwhile, federal officials in Washington are making the opposite argument. Interior Secretary Doug Burgum pointed out this week that the Trump administration has approved thousands of drilling permits aimed at increasing domestic energy production. The administration calls it an American energy dominance agenda. The theory behind that approach is very simple. More domestic production means more supply. More supply means lower prices. And lower prices helps every American family keep things within their budget. So you have two very different visions playing out here. One approach focused on rapidly transitioning away from fossil fuels, the other focused on increasing domestic production to stabilize prices. And California is essentially the testing ground for that debate. For drivers there, the issue isn't theoretical. It's showing up every time they fill up their car or their truck. When gas hits $5, $5.50, even $6 a gallon, that affects everything. Commuting to work, transporting goods, food prices, even the cost of airline tickets. Energy touches nearly every part of the economy, which is why debates like this one quickly become political lightning rods. Governor Newsom says global conflict is driving prices higher. His critics say California policy is actually doing the damage. Somewhere in the middle, millions of drivers are simply trying to afford their next tank of gas because at the end of the day, when Americans pull up to the pump, they're not thinking about political talking points. They're looking at the numbers on the screen and asking a very simple question. Why am I paying this much? And look, it's a valid question. And it's why a lot of people are leaving California as fast as they possibly can. That's why you have states like Texas and Florida gaining thousands and thousands of people moving to their states because they have to escape California. There's a lot of things wrong with California, and why in the world Gavin Newsom thinks that he can be a competitive in a national race when he has had such he's been such a dismal failure as a governor. It beats me, but hey, maybe that's what Democrats want. Love to get your take on it. Text me, email me, joey@joeyhudson.com. Leave me a message on the MyPillow message line, 864-477-JOEY, 864-477-5639. Always use promo code Joey when you go to MyPillow.com, and you'll get the very best price that Mike Lindell has to offer you. Maybe $100 off of the mattress topper. If you want a brand new bed, don't buy a new mattress. Just get the MyPillow mattress topper. Go to MyPillow.com. Use promo code Joey. GOP shots like Ozempic are everywhere right now, but here's the question. What happens when you stop? If you don't fix the reason your body gained weight in the first place, the weight comes back. Joey Hudson here at PhD Weight Loss. They don't just treat the weight as the problem. They treat it as a symptom of metabolic dysfunction, hormone imbalance, or inflammation. If you don't correct those, no shot or hack will ever last. PhD looks at you holistically to improve your health span, your energy, and your longevity, because losing weight is one thing, but keeping it off for life is another. Right now, when you call PhD Weight Loss and mention Joey Hudson, you'll receive 2 free weeks in the program, and they'll cover the cost of your food. That's real results with zero guesswork. Again, mention Joey Hudson when you call 864-644-1900. That's 864-644-1900. Visit them online at myphdweightloss.com. Stop chasing weight. Start fixing what actually is causing it. Call today. Be sure and tell them Joey Hudson sent you. Get you 2 free weeks in the program. 864-644-1900. You know, one of the most frustrating things for taxpayers anywhere in America is feeling that government officials simply aren't accountable for how our money is spent. And this week out of Minnesota, we got a story that raises some serious questions about exactly that. The Minnesota Department of Human Services, whom we know has gone through billions of dollars, we found this out over the last 6 months or so, the agency responsible for administering billions of dollars in public assistance programs was expected to appear before a legislative committee, which was set to investigate fraud inside those programs. We all knew this was coming. American people are ready for some accountability out of Minnesota. But when the hearing began, the agency just simply didn't show up. Not a representative, not a staff member, nobody. The chairwoman of the Minnesota House Fraud Prevention Committee, a Republican Representative Kristen Robbins, looked around the room and asked a very simple question. Is there anyone here from the Department of Human Services? And the answer was silence. She told the room, I don't see anyone. Now think about that for a moment. A committee whose entire job is investigating fraud in government programs, a hearing scheduled to examine how taxpayer dollars have been misused, and the very agency responsible for overseeing those programs just doesn't bother to attend. Robin said she was, in her words, incredibly frustrated, and I can imagine. And honestly, I mean, you can understand why. Minnesota has been dealing with some massive fraud scandals in recent years. Billions of dollars in taxpayer money tied to questionable programs and oversight failures. In fact, the issue has become so serious that Governor Tim Walz himself appointed a special investigator to look into what's being called the state's program integrity problem. I would say that's putting it lightly. Yes, there is an integrity problem in Minnesota. It's so bad that Governor Walz himself gave up on his reelection campaign. Now, the investigator, Tim O'Malley's his name, is a retired judge and a longtime Catholic diocesan official. He was the main witness at the hearing. O'Malley did not mince words. He told lawmakers that Minnesota has experienced extensive, well-documented fraud in programs designed to help the state's most vulnerable residents. And he said the state's failure to stop that fraud has done more than just waste money. It has enriched criminals, eroded public confidence, and slowed down the delivery of services for people who actually needed help. Now, that's a pretty serious indictment of how these programs have been managed. But here's the part that really caught lawmakers' attention. According to Representative Robbins, This wasn't even the first time the Department of Human Services skipped one of these hearings. This was the second time. And after the meeting ended, something even more remarkable happened. Robbins says as lawmakers were leaving the room, staff from the Department of Human Services suddenly appeared, walking in the door. Why? Because there was another hearing starting right after the fraud investigation. This is too good to make up, folks. That hearing involved the department asking lawmakers for more funding. Let me say that again. They didn't show up to answer questions about the fraud, but they showed up to ask for more taxpayer money. Robbins called it unbelievable. And if you're a taxpayer listening today, you're probably thinking the same thing. Now, when reporters asked the Department of Human Services why they skipped the hearing, the agency offered a fairly simple explanation. They said they had a prior commitment. So they just weren't going to show up for the fraud investigation. The department also pointed out that they have testified before the committee several times in the past. But Robbins says that explanation just doesn't add up because, according to her, the people who skipped the fraud hearing were the same people who showed up minutes later for the budget hearing. And the hearing they skipped was not some routine committee hearing. It was specifically about the governor's own report on fixing fraud inside the system. The investigator the governor appointed was there. Lawmakers were there. But the agency responsible for the programs under investigation was nowhere to be found. Now, Governor Tim Walz addressed the broader issue of fraud this week. He said Minnesota's social services system has grown into something he compared to a Frankenstein structure, a system where pieces have been added over time instead of properly reformed. Governor Walz says his administration is working on plans to modernize how programs like Medicaid are actually administered. The governor says the state needs stronger oversight, better eligibility verification, and possibly a more centralized system instead of the current mix of state, county, and tribal administration. In other words, the governor says the system has become complicated, fragmented, and outdated. And to be fair, social service systems in many states struggle with exactly those same problems. Programs evolve over decades. Different layers of government get involved. Technology changes. Sometimes oversight simply can't keep up. But here's the challenge. When fraud becomes widespread enough that lawmakers are holding hearings and taxpayers are demanding answers, accountability becomes critical. And that's why moments like this matter. Because when an agency refuses or fails to show up because they have another commitment, and they fail to answer questions about billions of taxpayer dollars, it sends a message. Right or wrong, it creates a perception that government is avoiding scrutiny. Now, none of this means every program is broken, and it certainly doesn't mean the people who rely on these programs don't deserve help. Many Americans depend on safety net programs during very difficult times in their life. But protecting those programs means protecting them from abuse, because every dollar lost to a fraud is a dollar that never reaches someone who really needs the assistance. And every scandal erodes public trust in the system. That's why these hearings matter. That's why oversight matters. That's why showing up to answer questions matters. Representative Robbins says she plans to send a letter to the department demanding answers about why they skipped the hearing. And in the weeks ahead, lawmakers in Minnesota are expected to continue digging into the issue, as they should, because the stakes here are not small. The investigations surrounding fraud in Minnesota's public assistance programs have involved billions of dollars over the years. Taxpayers, not just in Minnesota but across the country, are watching closely, because at the end of the day, government programs only work when there's transparency, accountability, and trust. Without those things, the system simply breaks down. And when that happens, it's not politicians who suffer the consequences. It's you and me. It's the taxpayers, those of us writing the checks. And often, it's the very people whose programs were designed to help in the first place. Because if it's not going to the right people, then the programs are not successful in doing what they were set up to do to begin with. We have to hold them accountable at all levels. We're going to hold the people of Minnesota accountable as well. All right, let's catch up on some text messages. Dom in Illinois writes, "Good day, Joey. In reference to Airbnbs in South Carolina, you mentioned that government should not be allowed to tell you what to do with your property." I did say that, Dom. He said, "Don't they already? I mean, here at least, we have weed ordinances where you cannot let your property be overgrown with long grass and or weeds. We have open burning laws where you can't burn yard waste or trash on your property. In places I've lived, there are fence laws where fences cannot be placed in a front yard, or other fences have to be no taller or lower than a certain height. We have pool laws where any swimming pool over 3 feet has to have a 5-foot locking fence around it, but a pond, no matter how deep, doesn't need a fence. Don't get me wrong, Joey, I agree. Law-abiding Americans need as little government interference as possible, but that doesn't stop them. Thanks, Dom in Illinois. Well, thank you, Dom, and you make some good points there, because, and that is my point, government is out of control anyway. And when they start telling you that you can't rent your home through Airbnb or Vrbo because they just simply don't like it, they want to protect the local hotels, or for whatever reason. In a lot of cases, they don't really have a valid reason other than some of the neighbors don't like it. Some of the neighbors are upset because their neighbor has a different person in their garage apartment from time to time. Well, that's just not a reason. Airbnb and Vrbo and a lot of these shared space rentals, short-term rental services, are doing very well. And if you talk to some of the tourism people, they will admit they play a big role in local tourism. In Greenville, South Carolina, last weekend, you had the ladies' SEC basketball tournament. A lot of people stayed in Airbnbs because the hotels were full. Or maybe they had their whole family and it was just more economical to rent an entire home rather than hotel rooms. Regardless, the government shouldn't be able to control what you do with your property within reason. Ginger writes, maybe I'm out of the loop, but have Tim Scott and other Republican senators given their reasoning for opposing the Save America Act? Well, I'm not sure that Senator Scott actually opposes it. And in fact, I don't know that a lot of the Republicans oppose it. They just don't have the votes, the 60 votes. They need some Democrats to come over in order to get it past the to get it past the filibuster. Tony in Canton, North Carolina. The American people want to know when the Bidens, Obama, Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, and all the other Democrats that did the American people wrong, when will they go to prison? It's time they go to prison. Well, Tony, you're right. But I'm sorry to disappoint you. I don't think we'll see any of the people you named ever in prison. That's just how our system, unfortunately, works. I don't think, regardless of what Bill Clinton does, I don't think Bill Clinton's ever going to see the inside of a prison cell. Tony in Traveler's Rest says, Joey, why are the politicians being paid during a shutdown? No, in capital N-O, elected official in Washington should be paid during a shutdown. You're right, Tony. We've got TSA agents out there going without pay, but yet politicians are getting theirs. They always protect themselves. That's just a given in politics. It's one of those ugly things in politics that none of us like. Your texts are welcome as well. Email me too, Joey, joeyhudson.com. Leave me a message on the MyPillow message line, 864-477-JOEY. You know, every once in a while, something happens in Washington that cuts right through the complicated language of politics and policy, and it boils down to a very simple question. A question so simple that most Americans would expect an immediate answer. That moment happened this week during a Senate Budget Committee hearing. Republican Senator Bernie Moreno of Ohio was questioning a witness named Brendan Duke, a former senior policy advisor in the Joe Biden White House and now a policy official with the Center for American Progress. And Moreno asked him what sounded like a very straightforward, simple question. Should it be a crime to enter the United States illegally? Here's the exchange.
Do you think it should be a crime to enter the country illegally?
I don't know anything about this. I'm here to talk about budgets with the budget.
You don't have to. Look, I'm not a lawyer. You don't have to be a lawyer. It's a simple question. Should it be a crime? I'll say it slowly. Should it be a crime to enter the United States of America illegally?
I don't
without
know anything
permission.
About this.
Do you have a home?
I run.
Do you have a place that you sleep in?
Yes, correct.
Okay. Should it be a crime for people to enter your home without permission?
Yes.
You're pretty certain on that one?
Yes.
Okay, but you're not sure if it's okay to enter America without permission, which is our home, by the way. You don't know about America. Okay, gotcha. All right, so this is the best the Democrats can come up with, Mr. Chairman. I hope the ranking member can listen for just a second, if you don't mind. This is the best witnesses you've got. A guy who can't distinguish whether it's okay to have people enter our country illegally. Of all the millions of people that you could have chosen to testify.
To my good colleague.
Let me finish. The best you have is a guy who has no idea what our immigration law is and isn't sure if somebody should enter the country illegally.
Now think about that for a moment. Not a trick question, not a legal puzzle, but a basic question about whether breaking immigration law should, well, actually be considered breaking the law. But what followed in that hearing room turned into one of those moments that has people across the country shaking their heads. When Moreno asked the question, Duke responded by saying he didn't know anything about the law. He said he was there to talk about federal budgets. Well, to be fair, the hearing was about fiscal policy. But the exchange didn't end there. Moreno pressed him and again asked the same question slowly and clearly so it would not be misunderstood. Should it be a crime to enter the United States without permission? And again, the witness said he did not know anything about the law. So, as you heard, Moreno tried a different approach. He asked him whether or not he owned a home. Duke said he rented one. Moreno asked something that most Americans instantly understood. Should it be a crime for someone to enter your home without permission? That time, the witness answered immediately, yes. And that's when Moreno made the point. He said the witness seemed certain about protecting his own home, but wasn't so sure about protecting the country. That moment triggered a tense exchange in the room. Moreno turned to the committee's ranking Democrat, Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon, questioned why Democrats had brought forward a witness who couldn't answer what he described as a basic question about immigration law. Of course, Merkley fired back, accusing Moreno of badgering the witness and urging him to stick to what he called the facts. Moreno responded by reminding him that senators take turns asking questions during hearings. And then he made another point that drew attention. He said it was ironic that everyone in the Senate follows rules about speaking turns, but that some politicians seem comfortable with people skipping the line when it comes to entering the country. Now, as you might imagine, the exchange quickly got heated. Merkley accused Moreno of attacking both witnesses and fellow senators. Moreno insisted he was simply asking a straightforward question, which, by the way, if you watched it, you would have to agree. It was a simple, straightforward question. Eventually, the committee chairman, Senator Lindsey Graham from my home state of South Carolina, stepped in, moved the hearing along. But by then, the moment had already escaped the hearing room. Clips of the exchange quickly made their way onto social media, as they often do, where it sparked a wave of reaction. Some commentators argued that the moment showed how deeply divided Washington is on immigration policy. And by the way, it really shows what Joe Biden and his administration, how they felt about immigration. They didn't feel like that these people were entering illegally. They felt like that they were coming here with a doors wide open, with a big welcome. Now, others said this exchange highlighted what they believe is a disconnect between policy debates in Washington and the way many Americans view the issue. Supporters of Moreno praised him for pressing the witness on what they believe is a fundamental question about law and our border. Critics argued that the witness was there to discuss budget policy, not immigration law, and said the line of questioning wasn't relevant to the hearing. Well, maybe it wasn't relevant, but he was making a point. And anybody, an elementary age kid would be able to answer the question, if you come into the country and you are not a citizen of this country, you're entering illegally. There's a proper way to do this, and this has been the hang-up, and this was the problem throughout the Biden administration. They didn't respect our immigration law. Now, whether you agree with Moreno's approach or not, the exchange did something that Washington rarely does these days. It focused attention on the basic principle behind immigration law. Because under federal law today, entering the United States illegally is indeed a crime. It's typically classified as a misdemeanor for a first offense and can carry strong penalties for repeat violations. But immigration policy in America has become one of those complex politically charged issues in Washington. There are debates over border security, debates over our asylum policy, debates over how immigration enforcement should work. Again, it's a simple law. We shouldn't have to be debating all these various aspects of it, but that's how the Democrats believe. Debates over how the system should be reformed, the Democrats and the Republicans can't come together on any of this. Those debates have intensified over the last several years as record numbers of migrants have crossed the southern border during parts of the Biden administration. Supporters of stricter enforcement say these crossings expose serious weaknesses in the system, and they did. Others argue that the problem is driven by humanitarian crisis, economic pressures, instability in other countries, and that's part of it too. But the bottom line is we can't save the world. There's ways that we can help these people if they remain in their country. They cannot come to the U.S. and expect us to take care of them for the rest of their lives. And the Democrats should recognize this, yet they still are arguing that we should have a southern border that's wide open to anyone who wants to cross. Your comments are welcome on the Furman Ford text line, 864-477-JOEY. That's 864-477-5639. Emails always welcome, joey@joeyhudson.com. Speaking of the Furman Ford text line, it's never been more important to support locally run businesses owned by people who actually live here in the upstate. Let me take a minute to talk with you about our friends at Furman Ford. If you're looking for a new vehicle, maybe a great pre-owned vehicle, one you can trust, or maybe you're looking to order that special vehicle. Either way, if you want a new one, a brand new one, or a pre-owned that you can trust, the folks at Furman Ford, they're there to help you. Their name is on the sign because their name is on the line, because every single transaction is important to them. Jim Furman, Matthew Furman. They do business the right way. When you stop by, when you give them a call, or maybe when you just send them a quick email, you're always going to have access to a member of the Furman Ford family. And by the way, they also offer great service, and you're not going to have to wait weeks and weeks to get it done. And you do not have had to purchase your vehicle at Furman Ford. Doesn't even have to be a Ford. They service all makes and models. Visit my friends at Furman Ford online at furmanford.com, furmanford.com. Here's another one of those stories that has popped up right here at home that reminds us just how chaotic those pandemic years really were and how much money was flying around at the time. Now, we're learning that some of that money may have been flowing in ways the federal government says were completely fraudulent. Federal prosecutors have just announced a major indictment involving a company that operated right in the upstate of South Carolina, Premier Medical Laboratory Services in Greenville. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, the company CEO, Kevin Murdoch, along with two senior employees, Thomas Lee and Vidya Narayana, has now been charged with healthcare fraud and conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud. Prosecutors say the alleged scheme happened during the height of COVID, of the pandemic, when testing was in massive demand and the federal government was pouring billions of dollars into testing programs across the country. Now, I'm sure you remember that time. Testing sites were popping up everywhere. I mean, they literally were putting up tents in parking lots. Pharmacies, drive-through tents. I mean, they were everywhere. The federal government partnered with private companies to run testing locations, and one of the companies involved was a national operator called eTrue North. According to the indictment, eTrue North contracted with Premier Medical Laboratory Services in Greenville, South Carolina, to process COVID-19 test samples that were collected at those testing sites. And that's where prosecutors say the problems began. The indictment alleges that instead of processing each test individually, which is the standard and reliable way to run the test, the lab allegedly began pooling hundreds of samples together into a single batch. Now, how are you going to get correct results doing this? Even I didn't do too well in high school biology, even I know that's not going to work. Pooling tests isn't automatically illegal, according to the authorities. Some labs experimented with it early in the pandemic when infection rates were so low. But prosecutors say Premier allegedly took things much further. Federal investigators say the company manipulated its testing software in a way that mass contamination in the samples. And according to the indictment, that dramatically increased the chances that infected samples would come back with a false negative result. In other words, people who were actually positive for COVID could have been told they were negative. Federal prosecutors say that made the test results, in their words, virtually worthless. You think? But here's the part that really caught the government's attention. Even though the tests were allegedly being processed this way, the company was still billing the federal government and insurance companies as if every test had been properly processed individually. According to prosecutors, those reimbursements added up to millions of dollars. We all knew people were getting rich off of this, didn't we? I mean, there was just too much money flowing out of the Biden administration too quickly for anybody to keep up. Now, Premier Medical Laboratory Services is no longer in business. The company shut down after a whistleblower came forward raising concerns about how the tests were being handled. That whistleblower complaint triggered a federal investigation that has now stretched on for several years. And this indictment is just the latest development in that case. In fact, this isn't the first time the company's leadership has faced legal trouble. Last year, July 2025, CEO Kevin Murdoch agreed to pay more than $27 million to resolve a separate civil lawsuit brought by the federal government and several states, including South Carolina. That case involved a completely different set of allegations. It was related to genetic cancer testing. Government lawyers accused the company of paying illegal kickbacks to another lab to advertise genetic tests to Medicaid patients in low-income communities. Prosecutors say some patients were targeted with marketing for these tests, which Medicaid was then billed as much as $12,000 per test. Wow. Some cases, investigators say patients never even received the test that they were billed for. That civil case ended with $27 million consent judgment. Now we're seeing the criminal side of the investigation move forward. The new indictment includes 16 counts of healthcare fraud and conspiracy. If convicted, each of the defendants could face up to 10 years in federal prison, along with fines of up to $250,000 and supervised release after any prison sentence. Now, again, we're talking about millions of dollars here. 10 years doesn't sound like a whole lot, and a $250,000 fine is pennies. I mean, if this guy can afford to pay a $27 million settlement, you got to understand how much money he must have made. The defendants are presumed innocent until proven guilty in court, of course. The allegations raise a bigger question that a lot of Americans have been asking over the past few years. How much fraud slipped through the cracks during the pandemic? Think about it. In a matter of months, the federal government rolled out enormous emergency programs, testing contracts, relief payments, emergency business loans. Billions and billions of your money, my money, was moved through the system almost overnight with no guardrails. And with that much money moving that quickly, oversight most often lags far behind. And that's what we're seeing now. We're already seeing investigations into fraud involving pandemic relief programs, unemployment benefits, medical billing, some of the business loans that businesses received to, in theory, stay open. Now we're seeing prosecutors take a closer look at some of the testing operations that sprang up during those early months. For communities like ours here in the upstate, cases like this hit especially close to home. Premier Medical Laboratory Services, again, right over on Pelham Road in Greenville. You'd kind of think that maybe some of these fraudsters would be out-of-towners trying to take advantage of us, right? But if these charges are true, some of our very own was taking advantage of us. For a time during the pandemic, it was part of the nationwide testing infrastructure, this Premier Medical Laboratory Services. Federal prosecutors say that operation may have been built on a system that produced unreliable results while billing taxpayers millions of dollars. That appears to be what happened. The legal process will play out in courts in the months ahead, of course. But it's just another reminder of something many Americans sense during those chaotic pandemic days. You and I talked about it a lot during that time because, and look, maybe I'm just cynical, but I just knew that with that much money being spent, and Joe Biden couldn't get the money out fast enough. They were writing checks like crazy. I knew there was no way that we could be spending that much money and crooks weren't taking advantage of it. When government spending ramps up that quickly, there's no way oversight can take care of it. Look, the federal government can barely take care of itself under normal circumstances. But in that situation, with the pandemic, people were panicked. The government was trying to act very quickly, and we got bilked of billions and billions of dollars. And now, hopefully, some of those people are going to pay the price.
That's it for today's edition of Just the Truth. Thanks for joining me in the PhD Weight Loss Studios. To lose weight for the last time, visit myphdweightloss.com. If you haven't joined my mailing list yet, visit my website, joeyhudson.com. Click on the Connect with Joey button so that you can receive our emails and the most up-to-date news. Also, join me on my YouTube channel. Be sure and like, comment, and subscribe. Just search for Joey Hudson. As always, thanks for spending a few minutes of your day with me. Do me a favor and forward this episode to a few friends. Just click on the share button and send to your contacts. We need to build an army of conservatives to win our country back, and we can do that by continuing to share the truth with our friends and family. Keep those comments coming via the Furman Ford text line 864-477-JOEY. Email to joey@joeyhudson.com, and I love your messages on the MyPillow message line. Again, that's 864-477-JOEY, 864-477-5639. Be sure and take advantage of the MyPillow special, just $14.88 on the standard MyPillows when you use promo code Joey. Order online at mypillow.com or call 800-893-4053. We're back again tomorrow and hope you'll plan to join us. Until then, remember, God's got this. He's still in control.